Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Fishing System in Food Wars World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 51, Takumi Aldini's Close Call. In the original story, Takumi Aldini targeted Soma Yukihira. However, now, with the even stronger Yuki present, his target naturally shifted from Soma to Yuki. Big brother, I think he noticed us, Isami Aldini said, seeing Yuki look in their direction. So what if he noticed? I'll challenge him once we get to the assessment area. Takumi didn't care. He just wanted to beat Yuki. But big brother, what if he just ignores you? Isami's words instantly deflated Takumi. Although Isami's culinary skills weren't as good as his brother's, his ability to deliver a verbal jab was top-notch, striking directly at Takumi's insecurities. I'll figure something out, Takumi stammered, then started brainstorming, no longer paying attention to Isami. Soon, the bus arrived at the assessment location. Led by Hinako Inui, the students entered a classroom. Hello, everyone. I'm Hinako Inui, your examiner for this assessment. You can call me Chef Inui or Hinako-senpai. After introducing herself, Hinako Inui began to divide the students into groups. She also wasn't fond of troublesome tasks, so she continued with the groups they had formed back at school. With Yuki suddenly appearing in class, the number of students became odd. We'll use the same groups from school. As for Yuki, you being in a group by yourself shouldn't be a problem, right? Hinako Inui said with a smile. Not at all. Having more or fewer people in a group made no difference to Yuki. Great. Now then, let's begin. Remember, you can gather any ingredient within this area. There's a fence surrounding it. If you go outside, you'll be eliminated. As she spoke, Hinako Inui specifically mentioned the nearby river and the fishing rods inside the adjacent classroom. This was, without a doubt, a mental trap. She deliberately steered their attention towards the river and fishing rods. Subconsciously, the students would think they needed to use fish. Thus, a group of students rushed to the adjacent room, fighting over the fishing rods. As for Yuki, the dish he planned to make also required fish. But he had no intention of fishing. Instead, he removed the handle from a mop in the adjacent classroom. Just as Yuki was about to leave, a foot suddenly stomped down toward his instep. So, he's using that same trick he used on Soma Yukihira, huh? Yuki thought, amused. Takumi's move was actually quite effective. In the original story, by stepping on Soma's foot for several seconds, even twisting his foot back and forth, he was able to force Soma into a cooking battle. This method was much more effective than simple verbal taunts, but the risks were also much higher. It was fortunate Soma Yukihira wasn't the fighting type. Otherwise, against someone with a bad temper, Takumi would have ended up with a black eye and a bruised face at the very least. Yuki didn't retaliate. Instead, he shifted his foot, moving to a position that subtly blocked Takumi's way. Takumi, already nervous about stomping on Yuki's foot, was startled when his target suddenly vanished and then blocked his path. To avoid Yuki, Takumi had to abruptly change his footing, which caused him to lose his balance and fall flat on his face. Kid, don't try using sneaky tricks. Otherwise, next time, it won't just be a fall. Yuki's mop handle stopped right beside Takumi's head. The sheer speed of Yuki's swing created a gust of wind that ruffled Takumi's hair. Takumi broke out in a cold sweat. That was close, too close. That mop handle had almost landed on his head. Judging by the force of the wind generated by the swing, if it had connected, while it probably wouldn't have cracked his skull open, getting his head bashed in would have been the best-case scenario. Big brother. Isami, seeing this, was startled and rushed over. However, his intent wasn't to attack Yuki, but to help his brother up. Seeing this, Yuki didn't bother waiting for Takumi to recover and left with the mop handle. I am alright, Isami. Looks like I can't use that trick anymore, Takumi said, still shaken. He had simply wanted to challenge Yuki using that method. He hadn't expected things to escalate like that. Big brother, you were lucky this time. You only fell because of your own mistake. That swing earlier really scared me. Thinking about the mop handle almost hitting his brother's head, Isami shuddered. These students are really something else, aren't they? Hinako Inui, sipping her tea and enjoying her snacks, had naturally seen this whole scene. To be honest, her heart had also skipped a beat. While it seemed to have nothing to do with her, it did happen in her class. If something had happened to Takumi, as an instructor, she would naturally also bear some responsibility. The students were now outside, searching for ingredients. Although most chose to try catching fish, falling for the mental trap, there were a few who noticed Hinako Inui's trick. However, even if they noticed, not many could easily find the ingredients they needed. This wasn't surprising at all. After all, most students here were young masters. They didn't usually gather ingredients themselves, they just bought whatever they needed. So, in this kind of natural environment, it was very difficult for them to find other ingredients. In contrast, Megumi Tadakura was practically buffed in such surroundings. After all, Megumi came from the countryside, and she often went into the mountains. So, she could easily find whatever ingredients she needed. Soma Yukihira, just like in the original story, went to the river to try his luck at fishing. He had also been influenced by Hinako Inui's words. In the original story, it was only after Takumi's taunts that Soma thought of using Hinako Inui's snack as an ingredient. Although Yuki knew the plot, the dish he was going to make also required fish, so he also came to the riverside. However, compared to other students fishing, Yuki's method of catching fish was much more direct and brutal. While he could fish with a rod, fishing relied too much on luck. Although he had his fishing space, the system didn't exactly provide him with fish. Chapter 52, A Simple and Brutal Hunting Method. Coming to the riverside, Yuki observed the fish in the water. After spotting a fish near the bank, he raised his mop handle. Bam! With a loud sound, like a depth charge explosion, a splash of water erupted. The nearby students were all startled by the sudden boom, and the fish in the river scattered frantically. What was that? What exploded? Many students were frightened that loud noise was very similar to an explosion. But when they looked towards where the sound came from, they saw Yuki holding a fish in one hand and a mop handle in the other. Yuki couldn't be bothered with using a fishing rod, nor did he want to try scooping up fish, so he just improvised and clubbed a fish, yes, literally. Moreover, Yuki applied his force evenly across the fish's body and the water's surface. So, the fish obtained this way didn't show any external damage. Normally, with this method, the fish's eyes might be knocked out, and its internal structure would be messed up. But Yuki naturally didn't have such concerns. With his super sense of touch and food honor, he could ensure that the fish was unharmed, even while clubbing it. It's Yuki-sama catching fish. What an incredible way to catch fish! He caught it with just one swing. Watching Yuki's actions, some students got ideas. Compared to patiently waiting with a fishing rod, Yuki's method was undoubtedly more efficient. However, they overlooked several things. 1. They didn't have a stick like Yuki's. Yuki had taken a mop handle. They only had fishing rods, too thin and too light. Trying to mimic Yuki's technique with a fishing rod would be pure fantasy. And then there was their own problem. Yuki had the enhancement of food honor, so his strike was accurate, forceful, and decisive. But other students lacked such control. Finally, even if they successfully clubbed a fish, they'd likely damage it internally, making the final dish's quality much worse. So, they couldn't possibly imitate Yuki. Watching their attempts, Soma Yukihira helplessly tossed his fishing rod aside. With those guys causing such a commotion, it would be a miracle if he caught anything. The fish had been scared away. Yukihira-kun, what should we do? Should we also try hitting the fish with the fishing rod like them? The student who had been following Soma Yukihira asked. Back in school, he had enjoyed quite a few benefits thanks to Soma Yukihira. Basically, he could just assist Soma and get good grades. You can't possibly club a fish with a fishing rod. Those guys are idiots. Looks like we need a more direct approach. Soma Yukihira took off his shoes and waded into the river. He clearly couldn't catch anything by fishing normally, and as for Yuki's method, he had seen something similar on TV. He knew it required considerable strength and skill. For a beginner to catch a fish like that, they'd need some insane luck. So, Soma Yukihira could only choose the most direct method: catching it by hand. Fortunately, he had caught fish in rivers when he was little, so catching them wasn't too difficult for him. And right now, the other students were actually helping him. Their flailing around had scared the fish into another area. With the fish concentrated together, it became even easier for Soma Yukihira to catch them. Soon, he also successfully caught a fish and left with his teammate. Yuki, after catching the fish, didn't leave right away but entered the woods. The dish he was going to make also required other ingredients, most importantly, chicken. Yuki. While searching for ingredients, Yuki encountered Megumi Tadakoro's group. They had already gathered quite a few ingredients. In these woods, Megumi was practically buffed. Finding whatever ingredients she needed was easy for her. Megumi, looks like you've almost got everything you need, Yuki said, looking at Megumi. Yeah, we only need 2 more ingredients. What about you, Yuki? Megumi, seeing Yuki holding a bucket with a fish in one hand and the stick in the other, asked curiously. I'm still missing 1 ingredient. I'm looking for it now. Oh, found it. As he spoke, Yuki threw the stick in his hand. Although the mop handle wasn't a spear, when thrown with his strength, not many creatures could withstand it. The stick directly hit a chicken over a dozen meters away, hitting its head with such force that it was completely deformed. Naturally, the chicken was dead. Yuki needed the chicken meat, not its head, so he hadn't held back at all. So amazing. Megumi's teammates' eyes widened, watching the scene in disbelief. If that stick hit a person with that much force, she didn't even dare to imagine what would happen. You're as amazing as always, Yuki. Although Megumi Tadakoro was also a bit surprised, Yuki's recent actions had made her almost numb to surprise. So, she was only mildly surprised. Megumi, I've got everything I need. I'll head back first. Good luck, Yuki said after picking up the dead chicken and the mop handle. Hearing this, Megumi Tadakoro quickly nodded and continued gathering the remaining ingredients with her teammate. With only 2 more left, she would finish soon, which would certainly be faster than those students who were still fishing. You already gathered all your ingredients? But how did you do that? I didn't see you with any fishing gear. And that chicken. Hinako Inui was also surprised when she saw Yuki return. Yuki was way too fast, and he hadn't even taken any fishing gear, yet he came back with a fish. As for that chicken, its head was completely deformed. Looking at the bloodstained mop handle and recalling how Yuki had nearly whacked Takumi Aldini's head with it earlier, Hinako Inui could already picture how that chicken was caught. It could only be said that she still underestimated Yuki. Yuki hadn't caught the chicken at close range, but by throwing the mop handle, hitting the chicken's head from a distance of over a dozen meters. With Food Honor enhancing his precision and power, even without Inferno, Yuki was incredibly dangerous. Chapter 53, Ingredient Processing Speed Beyond Comprehension. Using this stick. After dropping that line, Yuki went to process the ingredients. Hinako Inui was rather exasperated by Yuki's vague answer, but she couldn't just keep pestering him, not during an assessment. However, Yuki's subsequent actions soon captivated Hinako Inui's attention. Because Yuki had now taken out his 7-star knives. Although he hadn't brought out the largest one, the unique shapes of the other 7-star knives were eye-catching enough. Besides that, Yuki's movements were simply mesmerizing. The 7-star flash-severing knife dance not only handled ingredients with ease but also had an incredible visual flair. Several knives danced between Yuki's hands, and the ingredients before him were quickly processed. The fish, having been knocked out earlier, was now dead. Yuki's 7-star knife swiftly scaled the fish, cut open its belly, and removed the innards. In the blink of an eye, the fish was already prepped. As for that chicken, which had its head bashed in. Normally, preparing a chicken involved scalding it with hot water to loosen the feathers for easy removal. But Yuki had no need for such tedious procedures. He simply shaved off the feathers with his 7-star knife. Ingredients that would normally take a considerable amount of time to process were prepared in Yuki's hands in less than a minute. What incredible knife skills! And these knives are also incredibly sharp. He didn't even need a cutting board, effortlessly gutting the fish and the chicken. Hinako Inui couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Yuki's technique was truly stunning. She swore she had never seen anyone with such impressive knife skills in her entire life. Not to mention, this set of 7-star knives, she had never seen such unique and sharp blades before. Damn! That guy beat me to it. At this moment, Takumi and Isami Aldini also rushed back with their duck. Although he had been slightly affected by Yuki's earlier stunt, Takumi had quickly recovered. While he couldn't directly compete with Yuki, he could still try to compete secretly, like how Ryo Korakiba had acted towards Yuki before. However, when he returned, he discovered that Yuki was already in the kitchen. Brother, look at the ingredients he has. How did he finish prepping them so quickly? Isami Aldini looked at the already processed chicken and fish, totally dumbfounded. Catching the duck hadn't taken them much time, but after returning, Yuki had already even finished prepping the ingredients. How was that even possible? In such a short time, it would barely be enough to pluck a chicken, let alone process it like this. Yeah, there's no way he could have finished prepping all that in such a short time. Inui-senpai, there must be something wrong with Yuki's ingredients. Takumi Aldini was instantly dissatisfied and immediately reported Yuki. He wasn't usually a tattletale, but from his perspective, Yuki's actions could only be interpreted as cheating. So, naturally, he couldn't hold himself back. Not at all, there isn't anything wrong. I watched him prepare those ingredients myself. You might not believe it, but those 2 items were prepped in under a minute. Hinako Inui said with a smile. Yuki's ingredient processing speed was so incredibly fast that when others returned, they only saw the finished product. Such speed was beyond the realm of normal human understanding, so it was natural to think Yuki was cheating. But having witnessed the entire process herself, she knew Yuki wasn't cheating. A fish and a chicken prepped in under a minute? No way. Naturally, Takumi and Isami Aldini immediately rejected this. It's the truth. If you don't believe me, you're free to file a complaint with the Tatsuki Resort staff. Hinako Inui said with a smile. That Takumi and Isami didn't believe her was normal. Any regular person, without seeing it with their own eyes, would find it hard to believe. She couldn't directly make Takumi believe her. There were security cameras here, so if Takumi didn't believe her, he could file a complaint and see how his superiors handled the matter. She was just a temporary worker here, after all. The reason graduates like Hinako Inui were here at the Tatsuki Resort was partly to maintain connections with Tatsuki. After all, it's always good to have powerful backers, and partly to scout for talent. These graduates basically had their own restaurants, and besides themselves, their establishments also needed other skilled staff. But normal people couldn't keep up with their cooking pace. It was like when Soma Yukihira interned with Kojiro Shinomiya. Soma was completely superfluous there. Forcibly inserting such individuals into their workflow only lowered their efficiency. Therefore, the people they hired also needed sufficiently high culinary skills, and the students from Tatsuki were the best resource. Although these students would definitely leave to start their own restaurants after a certain period, being able to study alongside these graduates was a great opportunity. Most students readily accepted such invitations. As for these graduates, although they knew these students would eventually leave, getting a skilled assistant without spending too much was undoubtedly a win-win situation. Moreover, even after these students completed their training and left, their connection remained, forming a network. It was precisely because of this that graduates usually wouldn't refuse Tatsuki's invitation, even pushing aside other matters to come here. Hearing Hinako Inui's words, Takumi fell silent. Logic told him that a graduate like Hinako Inui wouldn't lie about such a thing, but logic also told him it was absolutely impossible for someone to prep a fish and a chicken in under a minute. In short, he was now caught in a dilemma. However, he knew very well that he needed to quickly prepare his own dish. But as he passed by Yuki, his pupils suddenly shrank, because he saw the innards, fish scales, and chicken feathers Yuki had removed. Those innards looked very fresh. Based on his experience, they had definitely just been taken out. "What's wrong, brother?" Seeing his older brother frozen in place, Isami Aldini asked with some confusion. "It's nothing. Let's prep the ingredients, Isami." Takumi Aldini shook his head, indicating he was fine, then returned to his station with Isami to start processing their ingredients. Just as they began prepping, Soma Yukihara also returned with the fish he had caught. Chapter 54, Dragon and Phoenix Dish. That speed. Still as ridiculous as ever. He's already finished prepping his ingredients? Soma Yukihara, after entering, wasn't surprised to see Yuki's progress. After all, at Polar Star, he had witnessed Yuki's cooking speed. It simply wasn't a speed possessed by normal humans. It was too fast. Since there were relatively few people in the classroom, Soma Yukihara's words were naturally heard by others. Hinako Inui, having watched Yuki prepare the ingredients herself, wasn't surprised. But Takumi was different. Soma Yukihara's words meant that Soma had seen Yuki's cooking speed before. This also meant that Hinako Inui hadn't been lying earlier. Though it was unbelievable, Yuki had indeed prepared the two ingredients in such a short amount of time. Just as Takumi was almost convinced, Yuki's subsequent actions further confirmed this. The 7-star knives in Yuki's hands had become a blur, further processing the already cleaned and scaled fish. The flesh was sliced from the fish bones, and Yuki quickly removed the tiny bones from the two pieces of fish. One piece was cut into the shape of a dragon's head, the other was carved into dragon scales. Such an operation would also require some time for a normal person, but Yuki was different. He finished it in the blink of an eye, and the finished product was incredibly exquisite, looking like a work of art. So fast. Isami, did you see that? Takumi looked at this scene in a daze. He had now witnessed Yuki's speed with his own eyes. It was even faster than machine processing, and one could clearly see the intricate details. I saw it, brother. His speed is too fast. I couldn't even see how he cut it. Isami was also stunned, and both brothers were dumbfounded by Yuki's actions. As for Yuki, he didn't pay them any attention, quickly marinating the fish before moving on to prepare the chicken. During this time, Takumi and Isami, having recovered, also started their cooking. However, this time they didn't try to compete with Yuki. The reason was simple: Yuki was far beyond their reach. It was like two people competing in a 100-meter sprint. One of them ran it in 10 seconds. While that wasn't a world record, it was still a pretty good time. Then, looking at their opponent, they see the other person finished it in 1 second. This was simply inhuman speed. The gap between the two was so large that it felt completely unattainable. Even the usually highly competitive Takumi felt demoralized under such circumstances. During this time, other students also gradually returned to the classroom and began their own cooking. But by this point, Yuki's cooking had progressed to the next stage. Since there were many people around, Yuki didn't use Inferno extensively, just a simple application. Even so, the rising pillar of fire still startled the others. Although everyone had witnessed Yuki's Inferno before, and on a much larger scale. This time, they were watching from close range. The visual impact was far greater than when watching from the audience seats. With the enhancement of Inferno, Yuki's cooking speed was ridiculously fast. A dish that would normally take a lot of time to finish was completed by Yuki in the shortest possible time. Others had just barely begun processing their ingredients, while Yuki had already finished and presented the completed dish to Hinako Inui. What an exquisite dish! What's the name of this? Hinako Inui asked. This dish is called Dragon and Phoenix Harmony. Yuki briefly introduced the dish. After listening, Hinako Inui couldn't wait to take a bite. The fish is fried perfectly, crispy on the outside, tender on the inside, and the frying hasn't removed the fresh flavor of the fish. Instead, it's perfectly locked inside, only bursting forth the moment you bite into it. The chicken is also incredibly tender. And thanks to your special ability, it was braised to such a soft texture in such a short amount of time. Although the textures and flavors of the fish and chicken are entirely different, once combined, they meld together perfectly. Plus, with the symbolic meaning of the dragon and phoenix, it's truly an extraordinary dish. Hinako Inui's evaluation of this dish was very high because it was genuinely delicious, and in her expert opinion, this was definitely a dish at the level of a third-class chef. Moreover, among third-class chefs, this dish could even be considered a signature dish. When she was a third-class chef, even she would have difficulty making such a dish. If she were to encounter this dish in a cooking battle, she imagined she would have a serious headache. The current Hinako Inui was a second-class chef. Although first-class chefs still felt out of reach, for her to reach second class at her age, she was already a genius among geniuses. However, there was simply no comparison with Yuki. After all, she was a good 10+ years older than Yuki in his generation, and plus, her talent was exceptionally high, which was how she became a second-class chef. But Yuki? He was still a first year. And just casually whipping up a third-rank level dish. This gap, even if Hinako Inui was mentally prepared beforehand, now also made her start to doubt if she was a failure. It could only be said that cheat players were on another level. Trying to compare yourself to them would only end in complete and utter demoralization. Undoubtedly, Yuki passed this assessment. And his dish was completely eaten by Hinako Inui. After all, for such delicious food, simply tasting a bite would be too much of a waste. As for the other students' dishes, Hinako felt she could make an evaluation with just a small taste. So, ignoring the other students' gazes, she finished Yuki's dish completely. At this moment, Yuki was also a little speechless. It was a good thing he only used a portion of the ingredients to make this dish. Otherwise, a whole fish and a chicken, even a burly adult, might not be able to finish it. After all, the animals raised here at Tatsuki were quite large. Looking at the remaining food, Yuki simply finished it all off. Leaving it here would be too much of a waste. And his actions left the students next to him feeling extremely tormented. Chapter 55, Assessments One After Another. Everyone knew just how terrifyingly fragrant Yuki's dishes were. And this dish wasn't just intensely aromatic, its taste was also superb. After all, Hinako Inui had given it such high praise. While they slaved away preparing their dishes, Yuki was already enjoying a delicious meal. This naturally made the surrounding students restless, all of them practically drooling. Yuki had saved a portion. This was for Megumi Tadakoro. Other students kept glancing over, but unfortunately, they wouldn't get to taste this dish. Since Takumi Aldini hadn't provoked Soma Yukihara this time, the dish Soma made in the end was a fish dish often served at his family diner. While there was nothing particularly special about it, his culinary skills were strong enough to allow him to pass the assessment based purely on technique. This was the advantage of having sufficient culinary skill. No need for any fancy tricks, he just passed with raw strength. Megumi Tadakoro made a mixed vegetable stew, with exquisite plating. She also passed easily. As for the Aldini brothers' duck dish, it goes without saying. Of course, not all students were able to pass. There were still many who were judged as failing. However, among the assessments set by the various alumni, Hinako Inui's was relatively easy. So, within the allotted time, they still had time to remake their dish. But the number of people who failed at first and then succeeded was extremely small. In the end, many students were still judged as failing. During the training camp, failing an assessment meant only one path: expulsion. The training camp was the high school department's first large-scale student reduction event, and this was the first assessment, so the number of eliminated students was the highest. Just from this single assessment, almost 10 students were expelled from Yuki's class. This elimination rate was quite high. Of course, this was also because it was the first assessment. Those who could pass one alumnus's assessment naturally had a high chance of surviving the other assessments as well. So, only the first day had such a high elimination rate. In the following days, the rate would plummet, likely rising again during the breakfast assessment. Well done, everyone. Next up, we have another assessment for which I'll be responsible. My name is Hitoshi Sekimori. What you need to do now is, after returning to their living quarters by bus, many students thought they could relax. It was already late. But they never expected that another assessment was waiting for them. While everyone knew the training camp was difficult, and they also knew about most of the general arrangements, the specific content was confidential. So, tonight's steak set meal assessment was also kept secret. Naturally, Tatsuki wouldn't use the same challenges to assess the students every time, the details would be changed. The steak set meal assessment was like this. They needed to prepare 50 steak set meals within the given time frame. It seemed like a very difficult task, but the actual portion size of a steak set meal wasn't very big. With some quick work, completing this quantity wasn't a problem. Because of the focus on quantity and speed, the demand for flavor in this assessment wasn't very high. As long as the students didn't mess up, passing wasn't too difficult. So, what about dinner after the assessment? Yoshino Yuki couldn't help but ask. Keep in mind, the Tatsuki Resort was a genuine high-end establishment. Even the most basic room cost 80,000 yen per night. While it was in yen, that was still quite expensive. So, Yoshino Yuki had high expectations for such a high-class hotel, but it seemed those expectations were now dashed. You'll take care of your own dinner. You're here for the assessment, not for leisure. Remember, you're students, not guests. These services aren't meant for you. These cold words shattered Yoshino Yuki's expectations, turning her completely pale. Quite a few students felt the same way as Yoshino Yuki. They had thought they could quickly finish and relax, but then they were told that all services had nothing to do with them. Actually, it wasn't about not being able to enjoy the resort services that bothered most of them. After all, most students here came from wealthy families and didn't particularly care about such things. It was this constant assessment that was hard to bear. Relax, Yuki. Don't forget Alice and I are here. After you finish the assessment, come to Marui's room. Then, we can all go out and enjoy some of the Tatsuki Resort services together, Yuki whispered. He had quite a few privileges at the Tatsuki Resort, privileges not given by Jindojima, but earned by him during his time at the resort. These privileges were recognized by the entire resort, so he could enjoy them. As for Alice Nakiri, the Tatsuki Resort itself was a Nakiri family enterprise, so she also had privileges. With two privileged individuals here, what kind of service couldn't they get? After learning this, Yoshino Yuki, who had turned pale, instantly returned to normal, even becoming somewhat elated. Just the thought of enjoying those luxurious services made her feel full of energy. Although the others, learning of this, weren't as invigorated as Yoshino Yuki, they also felt motivated and started to cook quickly. Speaking of which, an assessment like this is practically tailor-made for Yuki, isn't it? At this moment, Ryoko Sakaki said. Hearing this, everyone looked at Yuki. After thinking it over, it seemed she was right. After all, Yuki's Inferno could accelerate cooking, shortening the preparation time required. Inferno does give me quite the edge in this sort of cooking, Yuki said with a smile. Actually, it wasn't just about accelerating cooking, there were other advantages too. His food honor allowed him to easily multitask. Under such circumstances, Yuki could easily control multiple pots by himself. Even the Tenwok silver chopstick reversal technique could be easily replicated by Yuki. The key to food honor lay in the control of strength and focus. Yuki could easily multitask thanks to food honor. The Tenwok silver chopstick reversal, naturally, could be directly replicated. This technique was very difficult for normal chefs. Although many chefs seem to be able to multitask, especially Soma Yukihira, who multitasked during the breakfast assessment in the original story. Soma was only making simple snacks, all the same dish. The 10-wok silver chopstick reversal involved simultaneously cooking 10 different dishes and completing them perfectly without any mistakes. The difference between the two was massive. Chapter 56, Dojima's Request. This assessment was another opportunity for Yuki to show off his skills. Although he didn't intend to show off, just cooking normally. For others, his normal cooking was showing off. After all, Yuki's cooking methods were completely different from normal people's. Soon, Yuki, under the dumbfounded gaze of everyone present, including Hitoshi Sekimori, left. Keep in mind, at this moment, even Irina Nakiri, who was the fastest in the original story, had only finished less than 10 portions. But Yuki? He had finished everything directly. Even Hitoshi Sekimori was shocked. No wonder that Soma Yukihira guy said those things. This kind of cooking speed is inhuman. Takumi, looking at Yuki's retreating figure, could now understand Soma Yukihira's nonchalance back then. The current Takumi felt the same way. Although he was still in awe, he wasn't particularly surprised anymore. Students in the same class as Yuki also didn't find it strange. They had seen it before. But for students from other classes, that was a major issue. Although Yuki had defeated an Elite 10 member before, when Yuki cooked that time, to preserve the magic tricks effect, he had enveloped himself in Inferno. And the speed of completion wasn't that fast either. No one had actually seen Yuki's true cooking speed. But now, Yuki had demonstrated his absolute speed. This speed instantly shocked a group of students to the point of bewilderment. What are you all doing? Hurry up and continue with your assessments. Do you want to be expelled? Seeing the stunned looks of the students, Hitoshi Sekimori, having finally recovered his senses, yelled. He could understand why they were shocked, he himself was too. But they were in the middle of an assessment. So, he yelled to snap everyone out of their stupor. The students, finally reacting, continued with their tasks. But this time, they were truly shocked and also somewhat demoralized. Although there was Irina Nakiri, an Elite 10 member, among their peers, the gap between them and Irina was already very large. But the issue now was that even Irina Nakiri was far behind Yuki. Even Elite 10 members were now being left in the dust. Although they knew before that Yuki was strong, they hadn't expected him to be this strong, even in terms of cooking speed. Yuki, having finished his assessment, went and took a shower. He didn't go to the large communal bath. He had no interest in squeezing in with a bunch of people, even if there was probably only Jin Dojima there right now. However, after finishing his shower, Yuki noticed that some of the eliminated students hadn't left. Instead, they were told to continue waiting. Curious, Yuki asked around and learned that these students were the ones eliminated by Kojiro Shinomiya. Jin Dojima and others had discovered significant problems with Shinomiya's assessment, so these students were kept around. Yuki figured Jin Dojima was probably planning to reassess this group after resolving the issue with Kojiro Shinomiya. In the original story, the main reason Jin Dojima invited Kojiro Shinomiya was that he had noticed Shinomiya's problem. Among the many alumni, Kojiro Shinomiya's talent was undoubtedly top tier. Although not as good as Jin Dojima and Joichiro Yukihira, he was just below them. Kojiro Shinomiya was currently a second-class chef, but his culinary skills had already stagnated. The incident with Megumi Tadakoro in the original story wasn't planned by Jin Dojima, it was an accident. Jin Dojima hadn't expected Soma Yukihira to seek out Kojiro Shinomiya for a shokyuji. Undoubtedly, Soma Yukihira and Megumi Tadakoro were bound to lose against Kojiro Shinomiya. Jin Dojima didn't need them to defeat Shinomiya, he just hoped they could correct Shinomiya's mindset. Kojiro Shinomiya was a talented individual and there was still hope for him. That's why Jin Dojima tried. Actually, even if Kojiro Shinomiya hadn't changed his mind in the original story, Jin Dojima wouldn't have expelled Soma and Megumi, he would have simply given up on Kojiro. Just as Yuki was about to head to Zenji Marui's room and wait for the others, he suddenly received a call. He looked, it was from Jin Dojima. "Yuki, come find me at the office. I want to discuss something with you." Jin Dojima's voice came from the other end. This also surprised Yuki a bit. In the original story, Jin Dojima should have been waiting in the communal bath for the first person to complete the assessment. The first among the boys in the original story was Soma Yukihara. In the previous year, it was Satoshi Ishiki. They all met Jin Dojima at the communal bath. But this call meant that Jin wasn't there. However, thinking about it more carefully, it made sense. After all, the first to finish in this cohort would definitely be Yuki. So, having already known the answer, there was no need to wait. Yuki soon arrived at Jin Dojima's office. At this moment, Jin was the only person inside. He hadn't chosen to observe the students' assessment with the other alumni. "Uncle Dojima, what's up?" After sitting on the sofa, Yuki asked. It was just him and Jin Dojima here, so he could naturally act more casually. "Your assessment tomorrow morning is with Kojiro Shinomiya, right? I have something I want to ask of you." "It's about Shinomiya." As he spoke, Jin Dojima told Yuki about Kojiro Shinomiya's situation. So, he's basically someone who was beaten down by the real world and now thinks, since he got rained on, he should rip apart everyone else's umbrellas, huh? You want me to have a match with him? While his culinary skills are stagnating now, he's still a second-class chef. And even if I could win, what would be the point? Yuki stated. His cooking wasn't some magical plot device. Even if he defeated Kojiro Shinomiya, if Shinomiya's mindset didn't change, it would be meaningless. It's just an attempt. And you're the most suitable candidate among us. After all, you're young. If you defeat him at your age, the impact on him will be huge. Jin Dojima said. Mere words were indeed difficult to use to convince someone. But if you taught that person a reality check, they'd be more receptive to what you had to say afterward. After hearing Jin Dojima's words, Yuki ultimately agreed. Although there was nothing in it for him, it was, after all, a request from Jin Dojima. With his relationship with Jin, he wouldn't refuse such a small favor. As for whether he could beat Kojiro Shinomiya, Yuki wasn't worried. Kojiro Shinomiya wouldn't dare to go all out right now, he needed to hide the fact that his skills had stagnated. Although Yuki was a third-class chef, the quality of his third class was not comparable to those external third-class chefs. Chapter 57, Yuki and Alice Nakiri's Privileges. Then, during the assessment tomorrow, you find an excuse to start an argument with him, and I'll take it from there. Jin Dojima nodded. Actually, Kojiro Shinomiya was quite a difficult person to deal with. Although his culinary skills had stagnated recently, it had only been a matter of the last year or two. Otherwise, more people than just Jin Dojima would have noticed. The advantages Shinomiya had established before were still there. Given his talent, the only person at the Tatsuki resort who could confidently handle him was Jin Dojima. As for everyone else, they were no match for Shinomiya. In Dojima's view, although Yuki was a third-class chef, he was definitely top-tier among third-class chefs. And under certain specific circumstances, even he couldn't compare to Yuki's dishes, for instance, purely fire-based cuisine. Purely in terms of fire control, without considering other aspects, Yuki was invincible. If Yuki utilized this advantage, then defeating Kojiro Shinomiya shouldn't be difficult. After the two discussed the plan, Yuki left. After waiting a short while back at the dorm, everyone finally arrived. So delicious. As expected of Yuki and Alice. I want privileges like this too. In a private dining room at the restaurant, the Polar Star residents were enjoying their meal. With two people, Yuki and Alice Nakiri, possessing special privileges, at a place like the Tatsuki Resort, they could enjoy any service available. Yoshino Yuki, her eyes welling up with emotion, savored the dish before her inside. Right now, the other students were still struggling, making their own meals. They were already exhausted after a whole day's work, finally getting a chance to rest, yet they had to prepare dinner themselves. Many of the students, too tired to even move, just ate some fruits and vegetables before going to bed, too lazy to cook. In contrast, the Polar Star group was here enjoying a feast. The Tatsuki Resort's prices were high, but the service was naturally excellent, and the taste of these dishes was fantastic. After dinner, we can get a massage or maybe play some games, although, seeing how you guys look, you probably don't have the energy left. Alice Nakiri said with a chuckle. Looking at their appearance, besides Yuki, who still looked completely unaffected, everyone else was somewhat tired. After all, they had spent the entire day on a bus and then participated in 2 assessments, one after the other, the latter one testing physical strength and speed. Mental and physical exhaustion hit them simultaneously. Even though their culinary skills were high, reducing mental stress, they were still quite tired now. Let's skip the games. But a massage after dinner sounds great. Then, sleep. Everyone indicated they were up for a massage. After all, they could just lie there and be pampered. But as for games, they didn't have much energy left and just wanted to rest. After dinner, they enjoyed massages and finally returned to their rooms to rest. It had to be said, the massage techniques at the Tatsuki Resort were indeed superb. Afterwards, they felt their physical fatigue significantly reduced. Early next morning, Yuki and the others' class began Kojiro Shinomiya's assessment. Looking at Kojiro Shinomiya, who entered and directly sat down, Yuki was rather speechless. This guy was really something. Unlike Hinako Inui before, who simply sat at the side and observed, this attention-seeking Shinomiya just had to bring a flashy armchair and place it right in the center, then sit there with his legs crossed. It was an I am the master here vibe. And honestly, facing most students, Kojiro Shinomiya truly was like a master. After all, whether the students here were expelled or not was entirely up to him. However, it was a different story in front of certain students like Irina Nakiri, Alice Nakiri, and Yuki. Although Yuki wasn't a Nakiri, these graduates all knew what Yuki's existence meant to the Nakiri family. After all, the God's tongue's drawbacks weren't a secret. It could be said that angering Yuki was even more troublesome than angering Irina Nakiri or Alice Nakiri. Kojiro Shinomiya obviously knew this very well, so his gaze repeatedly lingered on Yuki. Just as Kojiro Shinomiya explained the assessment's content, all the students rushed towards the ingredient pile. Megumi, don't worry. No need to push and shove with them. Seeing Megumi Tadakoro's somewhat panicked look, Yuki directly pulled her back. Since he was going to confront Shinomiya, the result of this assessment would definitely be voided. So, there was no need to compete for ingredients now. Besides, honestly, Megumi wouldn't be able to grab any ingredients anyway. Even though her issues were resolved, when she wasn't cooking, Megumi was still the girl next door type. She simply couldn't compete with these people in a physical scuffle. Moreover, Megumi's physical strength was average. Fighting over ingredients with them would only lead to her being pushed to the ground like in the original story, ending up without the ingredients she needed. This scene was probably what Shinomiya wanted to see. It could only be said that his personality had become somewhat twisted. Are you sure it's okay if we don't fight for ingredients? Megumi Tadakoro asked with some concern. After all, this wasn't a classroom setting where you had multiple chances. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. They've mixed in some problematic ingredients. But with our culinary skills, solving these issues is simple, Yuki reassured her. The ingredients only had some minor problems, using them according to the recipe would affect the taste, but it wasn't a big deal. So, solving this problem was easy for them, they just had to modify the recipe slightly. Yuki had come specifically to find fault, so he naturally needed to get the problematic ingredients. Actually, at this moment, seeing Yuki not participate in the scramble for ingredients, Kojiro Shinomiya's expression darkened. The quantity of ingredients here was allocated based on the number of students. In other words, some students were bound to get the problematic ingredients. And those students who got them weren't allowed to change the recipe. It was equivalent to directly eliminating those students from the start. Chapter 58, The Adaptable Kojiro Shinomiya. Because of his past experiences, Kojiro Shinomiya enjoyed the feeling of control over others. This kind of control was the absolute dominance of a superior over a subordinate. But this kind of control also had a prerequisite: the target of this control had to be someone he could afford to go against. Among these students, there were a few Kojiro Shinomiya couldn't afford to pick a fight with, and Yuki was one of them. After all, Yuki now represented hope for the Nakiri family. If he provoked Yuki, although he wouldn't necessarily be completely ruined, his life afterwards definitely wouldn't be easy. With Yuki not competing for ingredients, the consequence was that Yuki would end up with the problematic ingredients. Shinomiya didn't doubt Yuki's ability to solve such issues. But solving them would inevitably mean modifying his recipes, and he wouldn't allow others to change his recipes. Using this trick, he had already eliminated a few students who should have been able to pass. If it were any other student, he wouldn't hesitate to have them expelled immediately. But unfortunately, there was Yuki. And Yuki didn't compete for ingredients. The students who grabbed the ingredients also noticed Yuki's and Megumi's actions as they turned around. Basically, everyone knew Yuki didn't try to grab ingredients. So, even if Shinomiya wanted to deliberately let Yuki pass, he couldn't. The other students would definitely question him. If this were in his own kitchen, he wouldn't allow any questions. If anyone caused too much trouble, he'd simply kick them out. But this was Totsuki. Although the Totsuki resort gave them significant authority when they came, if things blew up too much, it would definitely attract the attention of others. He himself knew very well that his assessment had serious problems. So, Kojiro Shinomiya was incredibly uncomfortable right now and didn't even know what to do next. Actually, he had one more option: to make an exception and let all students in this class whose abilities were up to par pass. As for the excuse of modifying recipes, he naturally couldn't use it. But Kojiro Shinomiya's personality was currently twisted. This twisted personality meant that casually changing these rules would only make him feel even worse. At this moment, Yuki also looked at Kojiro Shinomiya. Seeing the look on Shinomiya's face, Yuki could tell he must be incredibly uncomfortable. This was precisely the effect Yuki wanted. What Kojiro Shinomiya did in the original story really made you want to punch him in the face. After most of the others had chosen their ingredients, Yuki and Megumi also received their ingredients. These ingredients, without a doubt, had problems. If these ingredients weren't specially processed and were directly cooked according to the original recipe, they would produce an unpleasant odor, rendering the dish inedible. For Yuki and Megumi Tadakoro, solving this problem was naturally very easy. As for Soma Yukihira, Yuki didn't bother with him. Soma had obtained ingredients without problems, so he just needed to cook according to the recipe. This time, Yuki deliberately slowed down his cooking speed, even occasionally stopping to take a break. This further darkened Kojiro Shinomiya's face. Yuki's actions were clearly intentional. These graduates had watched the recording of Yuki's performance yesterday. That speed was simply inhuman. But today, Yuki was incredibly slow. If this wasn't intentional, Shinomiya wouldn't believe it. And when Shinomiya looked at Yuki, Yuki even gave him a smile. However, this smile clearly carried a hint of mockery. He could now be 100% certain Yuki was doing this on purpose. As for why Yuki was doing this, Shinomiya could more or less guess. After all, many people had told him his philosophy was wrong. He had always scoffed at such statements. This world valued strength. His status and authority were higher than theirs. Since they were working under him, they naturally had to be under his control. A group of students had already experienced Shinomiya's methods yesterday, and such news spread very quickly among the students. Shinomiya guessed that Yuki was probably also annoyed by him, which is why Yuki was deliberately doing this. Not competing for ingredients, deliberately taking the problematic ingredients, the purpose was to modify Shinomiya's recipes. And by slowing down his speed, it forced Shinomiya to taste other people's dishes first. By the time it was Yuki's turn, unless Shinomiya truly abandoned the rule he had established, it would be impossible to let Yuki pass. If Yuki was forcibly passed, he would surely make a fuss. Right now, Kojiro Shinomiya was racking his brains trying to figure out just where he had offended Yuki to cause Yuki to target him like this. If Yuki knew what Shinomiya was thinking, he would probably find it rather funny. It wasn't that he was specifically targeting Shinomiya. This was all because Jin Dojima had intervened. Time passed rapidly. When Yuki finished his dish, many students had already completed their dishes and had Shinomiya taste them. Of course, none of these students had obtained the problematic ingredients. Because those whose ingredients had problems needed to spend time resolving the ingredient issues. As for those who didn't address the problems with the ingredients, it was their own fault if they were eliminated. After Yuki finished his dish, he didn't immediately bring it up. Instead, he waited until Megumi Tadakoro had first completed her dish with the problematic ingredients. However, what happened next somewhat surprised Yuki. Although Shinomiya's face had been dark throughout the tasting of Megumi's dish, in the end, he still let Megumi pass. As for the matter of changing the recipe, he didn't mention a word about it. Clearly, Shinomiya had ultimately chosen to abandon the excuse of modified recipes to find fault in this assessment. While doing so meant crossing his own bottom line, compared to survival, things like pride didn't seem to be as important. At this moment, to make himself feel a bit better, Shinomiya was constantly brainwashing himself with the survival of the fittest mantra. His authority and influence couldn't compare to the Nakiri families. After returning, he still had to rely on the Nakiri family to survive. So, he couldn't afford to anger someone like Yuki at this time. With constant self-brainwashing, Kojiro Shinomiya also felt a bit better and eventually allowed Megumi Tadakoro to pass the assessment. However, he didn't give any evaluation, just a dry pass. Honestly, I admire your adaptability, Shinomiya-senpai. After Megumi passed, Yuki also brought his own dish over. Since normal methods weren't working, he could only directly lay his cards on the table. What do you mean by that, Yuki? Shinomiya's face darkened even further. He naturally knew what Yuki was talking about. It meant his earlier speculation was correct. Yuki was deliberately looking for trouble. But now, Yuki actually said it so blatantly. This action made Shinomiya somewhat at a loss. All he could do now was play dumb. Playing dumb, huh? Then let me be blunt. Your exam questions have problems. Tatsuki has already noticed this. The students you eliminated yesterday weren't directly expelled. I also didn't expect you to be so adaptable. Yesterday, you were all about your rules being absolute. Today, you just threw them out the window. Really impressive. Yuki smiled as he directly tore down the facade between them. At this moment, the atmosphere also became somewhat tense. The other students watched them carefully. Many students didn't understand why Yuki directly confronted Kojiro Shinomiya like this. Although they all felt Shinomiya's assessment had problems, no one questioned him. After all, Shinomiya was the examiner and held absolute authority. If he was unhappy, he could have you expelled with just a word. Although Yuki had defeated an Elite 10 member in their eyes and had very strong culinary skills, Shinomiya was an Elite 10 graduate, and he was also a first-seat graduate. After graduating, he had achieved great things. Without knowing the relationship between Yuki and the Nakiri family, in their eyes, Yuki's actions were purely suicidal. What on earth is this guy thinking? Isn't he afraid of being expelled? Takumi Eldini, who had already passed the assessment, was also dumbfounded. Is Yuki really going to be okay? Megumi Tadakoro also looked nervously at Yuki and Kojiro Shinomiya. Just as everyone was speculating about what would happen next, the classroom door was suddenly pushed open. Dojima-senpai? Seeing Jin Dojima, the students were all startled, and even Kojiro Shinomiya had the same reaction. He had no idea why Dojima would appear here at this moment. Leave this to me. Shinomiya, Yuki, come with me. The result of this assessment is voided. Someone will bring you to participate in the next assessment later. After saying that, Jin Dojima turned and prepared to leave. Wait, Dojima-senpai. What do you mean? I'm in charge of this assessment. Kojiro Shinomiya was getting annoyed. They had promised to give the graduates absolute authority. How could they now go back on their word and void the result of his assessment? However, before Shinomiya could finish speaking, Jin Dojima glared at him. Dojima, having held a high position for many years, possessed a natural air of authority. Just one look, and Shinomiya didn't speak further. In the end, he could only choose to leave with Yuki, following Jin Dojima. I can't believe even Dojima-senpai showed up. What the hell is going on? At this moment, all the students present were burning with curiosity. This situation's development completely exceeded their expectations. Initially, they thought Yuki causing trouble would definitely lead to his expulsion. But before Shinomiya could even react, Jin Dojima suddenly appeared and directly took both of them away. Why did Yuki taunt Kojiro Shinomiya? Why did Jin Dojima suddenly appear here? And what would happen next? These questions constantly swirled in the students' minds. However, before they could think too much, the person Dojima had arranged arrived, leading them away to participate in the next assessment. And this news spread among the students like wildfire. Yuki deliberately taunted Kojiro Shinomiya? No way! Yuki isn't the type to cause trouble. Upon learning this news, the Polar Star residents were extremely surprised and also very worried. However, this worry was quickly dispelled by Alice Nakiri. Alice Nakiri knew very well how important Yuki was to the Nakiri family. In a comparison between the two, the Nakiri family would only abandon Kojiro Shinomiya, there wouldn't be any other outcome. Moreover, judging by the timing of Dojima's appearance, Dojima should have been watching what was happening here all along, otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to arrive at the scene so quickly and take them both away. So, Alice Nakiri guessed that Yuki was doing this entirely because of Jin Dojima. As for the specific reason, she would have to wait until the evening to ask Yuki directly. Irina Nakiri, although also curious, couldn't determine what exactly happened. She could only ask Alice Nakiri later. Not just the students, even the alumni were also completely puzzled, having no idea what was going on. Meanwhile, led by Jin Dojima, Yuki, Kojiro Shinomiya, and Roland Chappelle were now in an office. Dojima-senpai, care to explain what this is all about? Kojiro Shinomiya asked, his voice laced with annoyance. Tatsuki was the one who invited him to the resort, and now they were stripping him of his authority. This was going too far. Since Chappelle-sensei is here, now is the perfect opportunity to discuss your little assessment, Shinomiya. The resort gave you authority, yes, but that authority doesn't give you free rein to do whatever you please. Jin Dojima said. That's right, the resort gave the graduates the power to decide whether students stayed or left, but this power had to be based on valid reasons. Kojiro Shinomiya's methods had undoubtedly overstepped the mark. If everyone acted like him, wouldn't they just be able to get rid of anyone they didn't like? What about Tatsuki's reputation then? Tatsuki's current reputation was built over a long time, it couldn't be tarnished because of Shinomiya. Indeed, Shinomiya, your assessment methods are problematic. While we did tell you to design the assessment yourselves, those designs must be reasonable. Adding problematic ingredients to test students' adaptability and knowledge is fine. If that's all it was, your assessment design would be excellent. However, preventing students from changing your recipes and using this as an excuse to eliminate students who shouldn't have been eliminated, that, Shinomiya, is where you went wrong. Roland Chappelle shook his head. He naturally also knew everything about Kojiro Shinomiya's situation. Chapter 59, Jin Dojima, Shinomiya, compete with Yuki. You also think what I'm doing is wrong? I've heard that many times. But this is what I went through. Full of dreams, leaving school, only to be crushed without mercy by reality. The veins on Kojiro Shinomiya's forehead bulged. Back when he was at Tatsuki, he was also incredibly successful. But after entering society, he was immediately hit with a harsh dose of reality. At that time, Shinomiya realized his previous way of thinking was far too naive. So, after achieving a certain degree of success, he began to emulate the very chef who had once crushed him. There were several reasons why Shinomiya ended up like this. Firstly, when he was at Tatsuki, he was the first seat, just like Eishi Tsukasa, now highly esteemed. And he held great power at Tatsuki. This also meant all this power disappeared when he left school. This huge sense of loss wasn't something just anyone could readily adapt to. Secondly, he went abroad. While Tatsuki was very famous in Japan, that wasn't the case internationally. Moreover, Shinomiya's luck was really bad. He encountered a terrible person. The more outstanding he was, the greater the threat he posed to that person's position. If he had encountered someone who valued talent, they would definitely have taught Shinomiya seriously. But encountering a horrible person was a completely different story. That horrible person wished nothing more than for Shinomiya to be beaten down and never recover. Tatsuki's Elite 10 system did have its pros and cons. The advantages were that it could train students' management abilities, and after becoming an Elite 10 member, the resources available could allow their culinary skills to skyrocket. But conversely, once they left school, this power was gone, and they needed to adapt to this difference. Actually, Tatsuki's Elite 10 system also had some ulterior motives. Tatsuki gave the Elite 10 considerable authority to train management personnel for themselves. Jin Dojima was the best example. If a graduate chose to stay and work for the Nakiri family, the Nakiris could naturally offer them good positions. Although the authority they held would still be somewhat reduced, it was better than nothing. Even if they didn't stay at Tatsuki but chose to open their own shops, Tatsuki's name could still provide sufficient advantages. As for those who chose to go abroad, if they couldn't be used by Tatsuki, then it was every man for himself. Jin Dojima was smart. He chose to stay in Japan from the very beginning, which was why he had reached his current position. If Shinomiya had chosen to stay back then, developing for a period before looking outward, then perhaps his situation would be much better now. Isn't that normal? Because you've left school. While Tatsuki's system is very harsh, it is ultimately still a school. A school will protect its students. When you enter society, this protection naturally doesn't exist. You should have already prepared for this. Now, you are facing a group of students. Indeed, they are destined to enter society and make their own way in the future. At that time, perhaps they will also face major setbacks like you did when you first started. But that's something for later, something after they leave school, not now. Shinomiya, don't confuse the campus with society. These are two entirely different environments. Roland Chappelle shook his head. Which one of these old hands wasn't a veteran of the culinary world? They had seen all kinds of things. The matters encountered by Shinomiya weren't that uncommon. Tatsuki had always been harsh, but it still maintained a certain bottom line. Didn't Tatsuki know how cruel society could be? To put it frankly, it was Shinomiya's own problem. What he said was ultimately just an excuse. Seemingly wanting students to experience the harshness of society in advance, but to put it bluntly, it was just an excuse to justify his own actions. Shinomiya, haven't your culinary skills been stagnating for some time now? Just as Shinomiya was about to retort, Jin Dojima said something that rendered Shinomiya speechless. Looks like I hit the mark. I noticed a problem the last time I tasted your food. You deliberately didn't use your full power to cook, probably afraid others would find out about your little predicament. But sometimes, burying your head in the sand isn't useful. This time, I invited you to Tatsuki not to target you, but for the sake of your future. The feeling of stagnating is not pleasant. No one wants their culinary skills to be stuck, especially not you. Your talent is very strong. Logically, becoming a first-class chef should only be a matter of time for you. You even have the chance to become a special-class chef. But now, you're completely stuck at second class. You've seen it, haven't you? If this continues, Hinako and the others will soon catch up to you, even surpass you. Dojima's words were like daggers, piercing Shinomiya's heart. Are you saying you found the reason for my stagnation? Shinomiya asked after a long silence. Since Dojima's reason for inviting him was to help him solve the problem, it meant Dojima knew the reason. Actually, you've also realized it yourself, it's just that you can't accept it. Not allowing others to change your recipes. You've trapped yourself, clinging to past glories. As a chef, if one wants to improve, one needs to keep learning. My old friend, Joichiro Saiba, his wandering chef moniker is because he runs all over the world. Back then, although my culinary skills weren't as good as his, and when we competed, I lost more often than I won, at least I still had a chance of winning. But now, he's a special class chef, and I'm still first class. This isn't entirely due to a difference in talent. These years, I've devoted much of my energy to managing the resort. Staying in one place, I rarely have the opportunity to learn new things. My situation is somewhat similar to yours. However, I'm very clear about this and have also been trying to find time to learn. So, my culinary skills are still improving, albeit very slowly. You, on the other hand, completely reject new knowledge. That's the reason for your stagnation. Among the students you judged unqualified, some of them used their own methods to further process the problematic ingredients. They changed your recipes, added their own creativity. Perhaps the dishes they made weren't as delicious as those made strictly according to your recipes. But have you ever thought about this? Dishes made with problematic ingredients without changing the recipe can only be called inferior products, completely worthless. Jin Dojima said a lot in one breath. His words were indeed very reasonable and also pointed out Shinomiya's problems. But Shinomiya's face was still full of conflict, his expression even somewhat twisted. Still not getting it? Then Shinomiya, compete with Yuki and informal Shokyuji. Seeing Shinomiya like this, Jin Dojima couldn't help but shake his head. It seemed that Yuki was still needed to give this guy a good reality check. Little words were too difficult to get through to him. Chapter 60, Yuki, I need a live cow. A match with him? I admit he's very skilled, he can't even be called a student anymore. But Dojima-senpai, aren't you underestimating me? Even if my skills have stagnated, I'm still a second-class chef. Shinomiya's expression twisted again upon hearing Jin Dojima's words. In his view, although Yuki was very strong, for Yuki to compete with him, there was still a gap between them. Don't underestimate Yuki. Although he's a third-class chef, somewhat below your rank, in many aspects, you're no match for him, Jin Dojima said with a smile. Besides being unbeatable in fire control, Yuki had other unique qualities, for example, what Dojima had learned during his conversation with Senzaman Nakiri. Yuki had incorporated the flaws in his dish, turning them into assets. Dojima had never heard of such a technique. It could only be said that Yuki's cooking was indeed very special. This time, besides Yuki being the only suitable candidate, this was the most crucial reason for inviting Yuki to help. Even if you say that. Shinomiya was still very reluctant to compete with Yuki, a mere student. Have a match with him, Shinomiya. Since you think you're not wrong, prove it to us. Just as Shinomiya was about to refuse, Roland Chappelle spoke up. This truly startled both Shinomiya and Jin Dojima. The reason was simple. Roland Chappelle always followed the rules and wouldn't break them. This was why in the original story, the other graduates stopped Roland Chappelle when the informal Shokyuji took place. This time, because Roland Chappelle already knew about Shinomiya's problem, Jin Dojima had spoken up directly in front of him. He had already prepared himself to be stopped by Roland Chappelle. Never did he expect Roland Chappelle to actively try to convince Shinomiya. Actually, there was a reason for Roland Chappelle's decision. Firstly, he was very optimistic about Shinomiya before and didn't want to see him continue like this. Secondly, he was also very interested in Yuki. Previously, in school, Yuki had privileges to skip classes. So, after learning about Yuki's situation, he had always been quite curious. Although he was also present during the Elite 10 battle, he hadn't personally tasted Yuki's cooking. Now, having this opportunity, he naturally wanted to taste it himself. With Roland Chappelle's persuasion, Shinomiya also agreed. Dojima also smiled at this. This was good, he had already been planning to force Shinomiya's hand. After all, Shinomiya intended to return to work in Japan. Returning meant he couldn't avoid interacting with Tatsuki. So, he had also planned to put some pressure on Shinomiya. But now that Roland Chappelle had spoken up, there was no need for him to do so. Just like that, the informal Shokyuji was established. As for judges, Jin Dojima also dragged Hitoshi Sekimori over. Sekimori's assessment was the steak set meal, which would take place in the evening. He was also the only graduate who currently had nothing to do. 3 judges, satisfying the odd number principle. Having them do a shokyuji? Even if it's an informal one, isn't that a bit reckless? Hitoshi Sekimori, having just learned about this matter, was also completely baffled. A graduate having a shokyuji with a student, and with Roland Chappelle and Jin Dojima both agreeing, no matter how you looked at it, it didn't make sense. We'll see whether it's reckless after we see the results. So, the 3 of us will be judges for this informal shokyuji. As for the theme of your shokyuji, there's only one: innovation. The time limit is 2 hours. Jin Dojima stated. This theme also surprised Yuki somewhat. In the original story, the theme of the shokyuji between Shinomiya and Megumi Tadokoro had been the leftover vegetables. But now, for his shokyuji, the theme was innovation. As for ingredients, there were no restrictions. Yuki guessed that Jin Dojima chose innovation as the theme because of Shinomiya's stubborn refusal to accept anything new. The reason Megumi Tadokoro's dish in the original story moved Shinomiya was because she had created a dish that never forgot the basics, and also made sufficient innovations, further modifying Shinomiya's own recipe. Since the ingredients are up to us, then I'll need a live cow, Yuki declared. Shinomiya was, after all, a second-class chef. If Yuki wanted to defeat him, he naturally had to demonstrate his own advantages. His greatest advantages now were his knife skills and fire control. He intended to use the Raging Bull Blue Dragon Slash. Requesting a live cow wasn't because he wanted to show off or anything, but to perform the slaughtering and butchering himself, perfectly demonstrating the Raging Bull Blue Dragon Slash. This secret technique could dissect an entire cow without shedding a drop of blood, perfectly preserving the essence of the beef. Keep in mind, normally during the processes of slaughtering and butchering, some flavor and essence would be lost. That's why Yuki planned to start directly from the step of slaughtering the live cow. Anyway, with the Raging Bull Blue Dragon Slash secret technique, he could complete the slaughtering and butchering in an instant. A live cow? You plan to slaughter it right here? You only have 2 hours. This time, even Jin Dojima was stunned. What was this operation? Slaughtering a live cow on site? How much time would that take? Don't worry. Since I made this choice, naturally I have my reasons, Yuki said with a smile. Never mind the fact he had the Raging Bull Blue Dragon Slash. Even without it, he would dare to do it. After all, with food honor, his efficiency was many times higher than a normal person's. Why were those chefs in the world of Toriko so fast at preparing dishes? Besides their physical conditioning, food honor was the key. After hearing Yuki's words, Jin Dojima didn't say anything more but directly had someone bring over a live cow. For the Totsuki Resort, acquiring a live cow was very easy. That wraps up this part of What If Fishing System in Food Wars World. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released 1 day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.